It's a shocking fall from grace. In less than a year, P. Diddy went from beloved music icon to disgraced sexual predator, at least according to the charges from the feds. Right now, he's behind bars in New York, the same place where just last year he was given a key to the city. It was a disturbing set of allegations that led to Diddy's arrest in the way of multiple civil suits brought by accusers, and in some of those suits, co-defendants are listed, and in others, celebrities. Could it be a time of reckoning for them too? We're taking a deep dive into all the celebrities listed in Diddy's civil lawsuit, and whether they too could face federal charges. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. A groundbreaking case brought forth just this week when 54-year-old Shah Diddy Combs was arrested on September 15th. He now faces some pretty serious federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy was indicted by a federal grand jury and is now being held in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center after he was twice denied bail. Diddy's attorneys say he was in New York for about a week before the arrest, anticipating the federal indictment. But he wasn't the only one who kind of saw this coming. After federal investigators raided two of Diddy's homes back in March, we kind of had an idea. Something was on the way just this week. We learned some of the items that investigators collected during those raids of Diddy's homes in both Miami and Los Angeles. According to the indictment against Diddy, investigators seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants from his homes. The court states that these items were used in something referred to as freak-offs, which were allowance-produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. According to prosecutors, Diddy and his associates transported commercial sex workers over state lines and even international. Diddy then allegedly gave these sex workers and controlled substances, at times unannounced to the victims. Prosecutors say Diddy did this to keep the victims obedient and compliant. He then took videos of victims having sex with these sex workers, sometimes without their consent. After all this, both Diddy and the victims would receive IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Federal investigators say that during the raids of Diddy's homes, they collected some of these recordings, showing the disturbing
and no
details
longer has
of
a
these
voice
freak-offs,
who will pursue
and
justice
the feds
for
had
her
a heads up
accusation.
about these recordings.
As of the
Some of the
against
civil
Diddy,
lawsuits filed,
no expansion of the investigation,
Diddy, namely
no
the one
isolation
brought by
orders,
Rodney Jones,
no
also
equipment
known
access,
as the producer,
no suspension of attorney
Lil Rod
communication.
worked with Diddy on
Everything
his Love
inside
album,
Solitary
starting
Block
in
C continued as
2022,
before.
and says he experienced
Everything
months
except
of
the
abuse,
fear.
all at the
If a
hands
female
of
warden
Diddy
can
in his
vanish
lengthy
after a
civil
single
suit.
nothing
Lil
except
Rod
the fear.
refers to these
If a female warden
saying,
can
quote,
vanish after a
required
single
Mr.
note,
Jones.
the ones who
That's
once
Lil
worked
Rod to
overnight
record
in
him
that area,
constantly.
the
Mr.
ones who
Jones
filed
has
for
secured
leave without
hundreds
giving
of
a
hours of
reason,
footage
the
and
ones who
audio
saw but
recordings
never
of Mr.
spoke.
Combs,
No one
his
mentions
staff
the
and
note,
his guests
but
engaging
everyone
in
knows
some
it
serious
appeared.
legal activity.
And if what it says
Lil
is
Rod's
true,
lawsuit
then
also
punishment.
lays out some other
Part
pretty
3.
disturbing
The
claims,
person no longer
like
in the
that Diddy
system.
sexually
The internal
assaulted him
personnel
and
database of
forced
the
Lil
Atlanta
Rod to
Federal
have sex
Detention
with a
Center
prostitute.
updated its
But
weekly
Lil
roster
Rod's lawsuit
under the
came out
category
swinging
Special
in more
Personnel
ways than
Code
one.
Adjustment.
Not
The
only
name
did
of
it
Warden
shed light on
TD
the
was
dark
marked as
allegations
removed from
against Diddy,
system by
but it
administrative
dropped some
order.
high-profile
There was no
celebrity
decision number
names,
recorded.
too.
It was
First, there's
deactivated.
Academy
Her
Award-winning
personal
actor
contact
Cuba Gooding
information
Jr. Lil Rod
disappeared from the
alleges
internal
Diddy was,
network
quote,
exactly
grooming him to
36
pass him
hours
off to
after
his
she
friends.
filed her complaint.
This fear became
The change
reality
log was
when
executed
Mr.
from the
Combs
system's
introduced
highest
Mr. Jones
access
to
level
Cuba
server,
Gooding Jr.
a device
while
bearing
they
the
were on Mr.
identifier
Combs' yacht.
DCCA1,
The lawsuit
located in the
includes
coordination
pictures of this
office on the
too,
4th
showing
floor of
both
the Security
Diddy
Administration
with Cuba
Wing.
and then Cuba with his
Only
arms
2
around Lil
individuals
Rod.
possess the authority to
Court dues go
perform
on
a
to say,
system-level
quote,
personnel
Cuba
removal
Gooding
at
Jr.
that
began
tier,
touching,
the head of
groping,
Federal
and
Human
fondling Mr.
Resources
Jones's
and
legs,
Detention Center.
his upper inner thighs
No
near
confirmation
his groin, and the small of
exists
his
as
back
was
near his
made.
buttocks.
The
And his
removal of
shoulders,
Warden
he rejected
TD's
his
name was not
advances,
accompanied
and
by
Mr.
any
Gooding Jr.
or
did not
protective
stop until
reassignment.
Mr. Jones forcibly
At
pushed him
11:20
away.
a.m., a
Here's
printed
former
copy of the
prosecutor
personnel
Melba
deployment
Pearson.
chart was
In the last
generated
couple
in
of years, there were
preparation for the new
allegations
week's
against him
schedule.
for sexual
Under the
assault.
section marked
So now we had
Internal
those
Alert,
prior
TD's name,
allegations, and now we see him tied to this case as allegedly trying to, assault a little there. Assault others back in on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse after allegedly groping a woman in Times Square. By the next year, 3 women had come forward accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a plea deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of counseling, but no jail time. Just this summer, he appeared on Dan Abrams Live, where he discussed those charges. when you pleaded guilty to a forcible touching misdemeanor in 20, eventually led to a guilty plea of a lesser charge. A year later, you settled a federal civil lawsuit, 2 more civil misconduct lawsuits. Can you understand why some would say, don't want to cast this guy? Sure, but I can also understand some people who come up to me in the street all the time and yell, show me the money, and say, hang in there, and I see what you're going through. You make movies for an audience of people. Right now, I'm making a movie for faith-based people who are excited to know our hope in humanity, especially the times we're in dealing with politics and the world issues that are going on. So that's where I am now. And have you expressed regret, sorrow, apologies for what happened previously? Everything that happens in my life is for a reason. I believe that, and if I continue to walk on my path, whatever that is, I know at the end result it'll be to make me stronger, to be a better person, to be a better father. And right now, that's the moment I'm in. Back to Melba says it's possible that charges could be brought against the actor. I am getting the feeling where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Because now we have 2 different instances where you're accused of the same type of behavior, years apart. I think there's something there, and I
will
don't
leave
know.
you speechless.
Cooper Jai
When the first
Jr. is
images
going
from the
to
federal
escape
raid on
from that
Diddy's
one
$40 million
because
Los
he
Angeles
already
estate
saw
were released,
definitely
no one expected this.
people moving
Neatly
away from
stacked in
him
display cabinets
within
like prized
Hollywood
possessions
circles
were 200
and other
bottles of
circles
baby
once
oil.
those
Right
first
next to
sexual
them,
assault
over 900
allegations
bottles of
came out.
lubricant.
So at
Rows
this
and
point,
rows.
I
It
don't
looked
think he's
less
going
like a
to
home and more
get
like a
away with it a
warehouse for
second
something
time.
far more disturbing.
Is it
These
possible
weren't
that
the
he
kind
could
of
face
items most people
charges
keep in
based
bulk,
on these
but for
allegations
investigators,
that were
it
brought
painted a
forward
chilling
by Lil
picture.
Rod?
Why would
It
one of
is
the most
possible
powerful
as
men
well.
in hip-hop need this much?
Again,
And more
we've got the
importantly,
statute of
what exactly were
limitations
they
issue
used for?
to deal with, so
It started
depending
with a
on the
knock,
time
then a
frame of when
battering
this
ram.
happened
On a
is,
quiet morning in March
again, the
2024,
Adult Survivors
Homeland
Act,
Security
which was the
agents
vehicle
stormed Sean
where
Diddy
many
Combs' LA
these
mansion
lawsuits
in the
came
elite
out.
neighborhood of
When,
Holmby
if
Hills.
these civil law
Not long
schools
after,
suits,
another team hit his Miami
came out,
property known as Litzy
there was a
Star
fin
Island.
out
These weren't
amount
just
of time
casual
for those
searches.
suits
These
to
were
be
federal
filed.
raids with
The
helicopters
time frame is
overhead,
going to be
agents
very,
in
very
full tactical
important.
gear, and
What
entire blocks
witnesses
on
come
lockdown.
forward,
What were they
because
looking for?
again,
That question didn't
this
stay
may not be
unanswered
a
for long.
situation where
Inside the sprawling
DNA may
17,000
be at
square foot
play.
mansion,
This may be
agents
more
uncovered a
of a
scene that left
situation
even
of,
seasoned
hey, yes,
investigators.
I was there, whole, Cuba Jennings Jr., putting his hands on the L Rod, or I, recall certain aspects. So it's going to be a very witness-intensive type of case. And the question is, will witnesses be willing to come forward? Another high-profile name listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Jennifer Lopez. From the standpoint of the names of the celebrities that were tied to this, the fact that Jennifer Lopez was tied to this back when she was involved in or party to a shooting nightclub when she was dating Diddy, and is now alleged to have brought the gun with her to the scene and gave it to Diddy, and that's how the shooting occurred. Lil Rod's team brings up J-Lo when establishing Diddy's history, writing his quote, Rico enterprise has existed for at least dating back to the 1999 nightclub shooting in NYC, when Mr. Combs required his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez to transport his illegal firearm into the NYC nightclub. The court also alleged Diddy forced his then-artist Shine to assume responsibility for the shooting of several individuals. Shooting happened on December 27, 1999. At about 2:55 a.m., a fight broke out at a nightclub in New York City between Diddy, Jamal Barrow, who's known as the rapper Shine, and Matthew Allen, who went by the nickname Scar. Guns were drawn and 3 people were shot. No one suffered any life-threatening injuries, and the victims were not involved in the fight. J-Lo and Diddy fled from the scene in a car, but were later arrested and charged. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but the others stuck. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to his home country of Belize. Lil Rod alleges it was Diddy who pulled the trigger, and Shine just took the fall for him. Because of this allegation, experts like former FBI agent Bobby Chone say investigators could take a second look at the shooting. If there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this major allegation, what would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago. Well, it would take, it would take a different look at it. So, in other words, he was acquitted on the state murder charges. Now, federal charges can be different. You can have RICO. You can have a continuing criminal enterprise. You can have, so the underlying acts, the predicate acts, if we used to call them, when I worked RICO cases, a RICO predicate act could be something like that. 1999 case, and you can use it as a predicate act. You can bring it up when I worked cold cases of this type, sometimes with the passage of time, people aren't as intimidated and they're not as threatened, and they get away from the person who was the threat, and they feel more forthcoming to testify or to give statements in testimony. But certainly I think that that case is going to be part of it. In the aftermath of that, they have witnesses that say he bragged about intimidating witnesses, paying off jurors. Certain, when you have that kind of stuff, if you go back and you find that juror that was paid off, or jurors, multiple that may have been paid off, certainly that gives you the impetus to kind of come forward and refresh those charges on a federal case. So the federal cases will be a little different. The charges are a little different, so it's not double jeopardy.
Present,
and so
no
I think
longer
that-
has a
think
voice
that-
who will
that
pursue
case
justice
that you
for her
mentioned,
accusation.
that you cite,
As
I
of the
think is
Aiken against
certainly one
Diddy,
of the ones
no
they're
expansion of
looking
the
to build into
investigation,
a much
no
bigger-
isolation
to me,
orders,
maybe a RICO
no
type
equipment
case.
access,
We also
no
know
suspension of
that
attorney
federal
communication.
investigators have spoken
Everything
to other
inside solitary
plaintiffs
Block C
in civil
continued as
cases
before.
against
Everything
Diddy
except the
to
fear.
learn more about
If a
his
female
personality
warden can vanish
and what
after a
he's
single
like in
note, thing except the
relationships.
fear.
That
If a
means
female warden
J-Lo
can
is
vanish
someone
after a
the
single
feds
note,
will want
ones
to
who
talk
once
to
worked
if they
overnight
haven't
in that
already.
area.
It
The
also
ones who
means
filed for
she
leave
could
without
be
giving a
called to
reason.
testify
The ones who saw
against
but
him.
never spoke.
It's possible.
No one
It's
mentions the note.
absolutely possible.
But everyone knows it
If
appeared.
I was the
And if what
prosecutor
it says
handling
is
that
true,
case,
then
I
punishment.
absolutely
Part
would list
3.
her right.
The person no longer in the
But of
system.
course,
The internal
we need to
personnel
know whether
database
or
of the
not
Atlanta
she'd be
Federal Detention
cooperative.
Center
That,
updated
of
its
course,
weekly roster.
changes the
Under the
strategy when it
category
comes to
Special
trial.
Personnel Code
So,
Adjustment,
you may
the
list
name of
someone
Warden
as a
TD was
potential
marked as
witness.
removed from
That
system
does
by
not
administrative
mean you're
order.
necessarily
There was
going
no
to call
decision
them.
number
The
recorded,
question
but was
is whether or
deactivated.
not they're going
Her
to
personal
testimony
contact
is
information
really going
disappeared
to
from
help
the
you.
internal network exactly
But there is
36
a
hours after
universe
she
where
filed
she
her
could
complaint.
testify
The
against
changelog
him
was
in
executed
terms
from the
of,
system's highest
violence,
access level
in terms
server,
of his
a device
interactions
bearing
with
the
other
identifier
artists,
DCCA1,
especially the folks that
located
have
in the
been
coordination
coming
office on the
forward
4th
alleging
floor of the
that
Security
he has harmed
Administration
them
Wing.
in some way.
Only
or
2
engaged
individuals
in,
possess the authority to
human
perform a
trafficking
system-level
and sex
personnel
trafficking.
removal at
So,
that tier,
was she
the head of
aware
Federal
any of
Human
that
Resources
going on?
and
Did
Detention
she see
Center.
him with
No
underage
confirmation
girls,
exists
or was she
application was
present
made.
for when
The
some
removal of
those
Warden
videos were
TD's
taken
name was not
at Little
accompanied by
Robin,
any or
included
protective
screenshots
reassignment.
of those videos
At
in his
11:20
pleadings.
a.m., a
So,
printed copy
how
of the
much of that
personnel
did she-
deployment chart was
when did she
generated
know
in
it, and
preparation
what
for the
actions
new
did
week's
she take
schedule.
at the time?
Under the
Is that
section
part
marked
of the reason
Internal
why they
Alert,
broke up?
TD's
We
name
don't know. So all of this will to be seen. Obviously, the prosecution and law enforcement need to speak with her, get a statement from her to understand what she knows or what she could be able to testify to, and then make appropriate decisions from there. But it's not just artists that Lil Rod named either. He specifically mentioned Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, in Septics. It reads, in part, quote, Mr. Colmis was known for throwing the best parties, affiliation with and/or sponsorship. Mr. Colmis, sex trafficking parties, garner legitimacy and access to celebrities such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries, like British Royal Prince Harry. Why even name Prince Harry? There's no allegations against him, or anything, but why bring him up? I think it may have been a move to bring more credibility to the filing and say that, basically, he being Diddy, was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself, so he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, bring up all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening. And just because you were at a party doesn't mean what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the part is being thrown in a mansion, there are various floors and wings, so it is completely possible that he was there and did not participate. Now, you had said Prince Andrew, especially as a result of the allegations that
will
came
leave
out
you
in
speechless.
connection
When the
with
first
the
images from the federal raid on Diddy's $40 million Los
and
Angeles
that they
estate were
traveled
released,
together.
no one expected
And,
this.
there
Neatly
was a
stacked in
person
display
that
cabinets
alleged
like prized
that he had
possessions were 200 bottles of baby
sexually
oil.
assaulted
Right next to
her
them,
while she
over
was
900
underage.
bottles of lubricant.
That would be a
rows
different
and
story.
rows.
But
It looked less
Prince
like a
Harry
home and more
the
like a
way that
warehouse
it
for
was
something far more
mentioned
disturbing.
seemed to be
These
very,
weren't the kind of
again,
items most
just
people
sort
keep
of
in bulk,
trying
but
to
for
bring
investigators, it
legitimacy
painted a
and talk
chilling
about
picture.
these were
Why
the
would one
people
of the
that
most powerful
that
men in
did.
hip-hop
He
need this
surrounded
much?
himself
And more
by
importantly,
to protect
what exactly
himself.
were they used for?
Prince Harry has no
It started with a
criminal
knock,
charges
then a
or
battering
even
ram.
any
On a quiet morning
accusations
in March
of illegal
2024,
activity, but
Homeland
he could
Security
still
agents stormed
see the
Sean Diddy
inside of a
Combs' LA
courtroom
mansion in the elite
defamation
neighborhood of
case.
Palm Beach Hills.
It's possible
Not
that
long after,
Prince
another
Harry
team hit his
may be
Miami
able to
property on the
preserve his
Gillespie Star
reputation,
Island.
and
These
since
weren't just
it was
casual
such a
searches, these
minuscule
were federal
mention
raids with
in the
helicopters overhead,
greater
agents in
context
full
of
tactical
this
gear,
filing,
and entire
he may
blocks on
be
lockdown.
okay.
What were they
Another
looking for?
celebrity
That question
mentioned
didn't stay
in Lil
unanswered
Rod's
for long.
lawsuit is
Inside
Young
the sprawling
Miami, who
17,000
dated
square foot
Diddy
mansion,
from the
agents uncovered a
lawsuit.
scene that
Young
left even
Miami's
seasoned
cousin
investigators
assaulted Lil Rod during the
controlled the sexual
Thanksgiving holiday in
furnishings.
2022.
She
Similar
called
to
freak
Prince
offs.
Harry, there are no allegations
often
against
electronically
Young
recorded
Miami
them.
herself,
The few
so
bottles.
there's
We're
probably
talking
no worry
hundreds.
of
It
charges
looked
being
less like
filed against her, but there could be charges against some of the other people listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit. That's people like Diddy's chief of staff, Christina Coram, who Lil Rod compares to Ghislaine Maxwell, the longtime companion of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein died by suicide in 2019 when he faced numerous charges of sexual assault over the course of multiple years. Maxwell was charged and found guilty of sex trafficking in relation to her time with Epstein, and she is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. Lil Rod says Christina Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Colemas and ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, EHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Colemas and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in Miami. This is referenced in Diddy's indictment, too, saying members in associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and other Combs business employees, facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil lubricant, extra linens, and lighting. Federal prosecutors also alleged these associates arranged travel for victims and commercial sex workers, delivered large sums of cash to Diddy to pay these sex workers, and even scheduled the delivery of IV fluid. So, according to Melba, it's possible some of these associates are charged too. None of these cases, when you have these high-profile people that have been using people over years, these cases happen without a hand. Kelly had a handler, Epstein had a handler, Weinstein had a handler. Everybody has, in those scenarios of those powerful people, powerful men that are abusing other people, they have someone that does their dirty work. And it's usually not only just one person, it's several people who may have different duties. So again, seeing this woman being his handler, being the person to get him drugs, being the person to procure sex workers for him, being the person to basically be on cleanup duty in case of, covering up or silencing people that might want to come forward, that's not unusual. And she is also going to bear the brunt of criminal liability, just like Ghislaine Maxwell did, and basically had to take the entire brunt of the criminal justice system alone because of the fact that,
Epstein committed suicide and was not able to be held accountable. And we can't talk about Diddy without mentioning Cassie, the one whose lawsuit blew the lid off Diddy's alleged scheme. She filed civil suit against Diddy last November under the New York Survivor Act, meaning any sexual assault survivor could file suit against their accused predator, and the statute of limitation didn't matter. Cassie's lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, but it was still made public, dropping a laundry list of bombshells about Diddy that the public hadn't previously heard. Cassie's lawsuit outlined years of abuse by Diddy, starting she was just 19 years old, and at the time, he was 37, according to her
present,
suit. Diddy
and no
was
longer
prone
has
to
a voice who will
uncontrollable
pursue
rage
justice
and
for her
frequently
accusation.
beat Cassie
As of the
savagely.
taken against
Cassie
Diddy,
alleged
no
Diddy
expansion of the
forced her
investigation,
to use
no
drugs
isolation
and would
orders,
physically beat
no
her,
equipment
or
access,
force her
no
to
suspension
have
of attorney
sex with
communication.
prostitutes.
Everything
And
inside
there's the
solitary
gut
block C
allegation
continued
that
as
on
before.
at least two
Everything
occasions,
except the
Diddy
fear.
demanded
If a
Cassie
female
hold
warden
his
can
gun
vanish
in
after
her
a single
purse.
note,
The
thing except
lawsuit
the fear.
goes on to
If a
state,
female
quote,
warden
"There
can
was no
vanish after a
clear
single
reason
note,
why
ones who
Mr.
once worked
Holmes
overnight in that
required her
area,
to hold
the
his
ones who
guns,
filed for
except
leave
to
without giving a
reinforce
reason,
to
the
his
ones
young
who saw but
girlfriend
never
that he
spoke.
was violent,
No one mentions the
powerful,
note,
and dangerous.
but everyone knows
This
it
echoes
appeared.
similar
And if what it
allegations
says is
made
true,
by Lil
then
Rod
punishment.
about Jennifer
Part 3.
Lopez's
The
part
person
in
no
the
longer in the system.
1999
The internal
New York
personnel
nightclub
database of the
shooting.
Atlanta
Not only
Federal
did
Detention
Jennifer
Center
Lopez
updated its
allegedly
weekly
bring
roster.
the gun to
Under the
club,
category
now we're
Special
also
Personnel
looking
Code
at
Adjustment,
years later,
the name of
Cassie
Warden
coming
TD
forward
was marked
and
as
saying
removed
that
from
Diddy
system by
forced her
administrative
to
order.
carry a gun
There was no
with her
decision number
when they went
recorded,
to
but was
different
deactivated.
events. So,
Her
again,
personal
I think
contact
that
information
this is more
disappeared from
along
the
the
internal
lines of
network
when you look
exactly
at this
36
from a
hours
domestic
after she
violence
filed her
lens,
complaint.
from the standpoint
The
of
changelog
the
was
abuser
executed from
being
the
very
system's highest
controlling
access
and
level
demanding
server,
certain
a device
activities
bearing the
to prove
identifier
loyalty to,
DCCA1,
you know,
located in the
basically put
Coordination
yourself
Office on the
in a
4th
bad
floor of the
situation.
Security
Only
Administration
he can be
Wing.
the one to save you,
Only two
basically.
individuals possess the
So,
authority
in
to
seeing
perform
that
a
the
system-level
parallels
personnel
between
removal at that
J.Lo's
tier, the
experience
head of Federal
and
Human
Cassie's
Resources
experience,
and
number
Detention
one,
Center.
it brings more
No
credibility
confirmation
to what
exists
Cassie
as
said
patient was
in her
made.
pleadings,
The
but
removal
also,
of Warden
again,
TD's
it
name
causes
was
us
not
to
accompanied
look
by
at
any
Jennifer
or
Lopez
protective
and be like
reassignment.
some of the comments
At
she made
11:20
about the
a.m.,
end
a printed
of her
copy of the
relationship
personnel
to
deployment
Diddy
chart
in
was
terms
generated
of,
in
well,
preparation
you know,
for the new
there was
week's schedule.
infidelity and,
Under
you
the
know,
section
she
marked
kind of
Internal
skirted the
Alert,
issue a bit.
TD's
But
name.
when you start to look back at your comments, you start to think, oh, were you in a domestic violence relationship with Diddy, much like how Cass ended up in a domestic violence relationship with him. Cassie kind of broke the floodgate, so to speak, when she made her civil suit back in November. These crazy allegations, we'd never heard anything like it before. And then, all of a sudden, we have several more people coming forward, and then more. It turns to 2024, so we have multiple plaintiffs who are coming forward, alleging very similar things. Wondering, without these civil suits, would we even be here right now? Would Diddy even have been arrested and indicted? I really don't think so. I really don't think so, because Cassie's lawsuit opened the floodgates, and I think it empowered other survivors to come forward and tell their story. And when Little Rod came forward, I think that was just another huge, just a huge moment in this case, because now you have male victims coming forward, and we know statistically male victims of sexual assault generally don't report for a number of reasons, but they many times view it as an attack on their masculinity, and they're very concerned about how they would be viewed publicly. And Little Rod was brave, which I really commend his bravery in standing up and saying, listen, this is what happened to me, and that empowered more and more folks to come forward, including, most recently, Danity K, you know, one of the members of Danity Kane, stating that he had abused her, and she had witnessed the abuse he had levied on others. So I think that all of these voices coming forward and saying, listen, there's something here. The feds took notice, And
the
even
first
though they
images
may
from the
not have
federal
been
raid on
public
Diddy's
about
$40
it
million
at first,
Los
we
Angeles
knew,
estate were
obviously,
released, no one
when they
expected
searched
this.
the houses,
Neatly
we
stacked in
knew that
display
this
cabinets
was
like
getting
prized
very
possessions were
serious.
200
But
bottles
they
of baby
were
oil.
monitoring
Right next to
this
them,
the
over
minute that
900
Cassie
bottles of
filed her
lubricant.
lawsuit.
Rows and
And
rows.
They read
It
those
looked less like a
allegations,
home
I
and
can
more
assure
like a
you that
warehouse for something far
investigations
more
started
disturbing.
immediately,
These
and
weren't the
then
kind
as
of
more
items
and more
most people keep in
survivors
bulk,
came forward
but for
again,
investigators,
the
it
feds
painted
would
a
be
chilling
going and
picture. Why
interviewing
would
each
one
of
the
those
most
people,
powerful men in
seeing
hip
what
hop need this
evidence
much?
they have.
And more
So, for
importantly,
instance,
what
do they
exactly were
have
they used for?
maybe some cell phone
It started
footage?
with a knock,
Can they
then a battering
substantiate
ram.
what
On
occurred
a
to
quiet
them in
morning
other
in March
ways? Maybe
2024,
follow-up
Homeland
text
Security
messages,
agents stormed
emails,
Sean Diddy
all of
Combs'
these
LA
things are
mansion in the
aspects
elite
that
neighborhood
the
of Holmby
are able
Hills.
to use to
Not long
now
after,
bring in
another team
their
hit his
case
Miami
in
property
chief
on the Gillespie
against
Star
P.
Island.
Months
These
ago,
weren't just
we
casual
reported that
searches, these
Cassie
were federal
was
raids with
working with
helicopters
federal
overhead,
investigators in
agents
the
in full
case against
tactical
Diddy.
gear,
Can't
and
know
entire
for
blocks on
sure
lockdown.
whether she
What were they
testified
looking
in
for?
the grand
That
jury,
question didn't stay
hearing that
unanswered for
would
long.
ultimately
Inside the
indict
sprawling
Diddy, but it's
17,000
likely
square foot
at
mansion,
least
agents
some of his
uncovered a scene that
accusers
left even
did.
seasoned
I do
investigators
believe that
allegedly
a
plan
number of the
and control the
survivors
sex
would have
performances,
testified. I
which we
don't think
call
that
freak
they would
offs.
have brought all of them
We
because
often
of the fact
electronically
that,
record
number
the
one, you
A
want
few
to
bottles. We're
testifying
talking
is
hundreds. It
traumatizing,
looked less like a
especially when you're talking about the most awful day likely of your life and some very degrading things that happen to you, and you have to tell that to a bunch of people you don't know. So it's you have to be very cautious in when and how you bring your victims and your survivors to testify, and think about that in terms of your strategy, because again, you may want to save some of the survivors for the actual trial if this does go to trial, and maybe just pick one or two that make the point right, and then you can fill it in with more evidence as the trial proceeds. But you don't necessarily have to show all of your evidence to the grand jury. You just pick the strongest pieces of evidence so that, again, you're not burning your survivors out before they get to the point of trial unnecessarily. Obviously, they do have to testify and, tell their story so that the jury has something to deliberate on. But at the same token, you don't want to push them too much because, again, that trauma is very real. And even if they are getting assistance through counseling or something along those lines, it's still a lot to have to talk about it, especially in such a with the huge media frenzy around it. And, so many people weighing in, and whether it be social media or other celebrities or things like that. So those are some of the things think the assistant US attorney would have been considering when deciding who should be brought in front of the grand jury to testify. And when it comes time for trial, we could expect to hear from Cassie or other accusers in federal court. You're bringing up a really good point because, as you said, this is probably one of the darkest times of these survivors' lives, and they have to come forward with these serious allegations and relive the trauma that I'm sure they've been working to overcome. It's really tough, but we're assuming that a lot of them are going to testify at the trial, whenever that may be. And there are several accusers that have to go through and do all of that. What would it look like at the trial? Then at the trial. Now, the key is the US Attorney's Office has to make sure that they're not going too far afield with bad character evidence. We saw how that kind of backfired in the Harvey Weinstein case, where as well as Bill Cosby case, where other instances were brought in that were maybe not as close in time, or more so, not really enlightening the jury about what happened in the charges that were in the indictment, but more so, he's just a really bad, horrible, predatory person. That may be the truth. However, when it comes to proving the charges at hand, you have to be very focused on making sure the jury understands what happened during the time frames that are specified in the indictment. And so, if some of these other survivors, let's say something happened 10 years ago, that might be too far in time for them to be able to testify. But if we're talking about an instance of something that happened last year, for instance, that might be closer in time to allow them to be able to testify. And again, if they have specific knowledge about certain aspects of the indictment, of course,
they'll be brought to testify. Again, you have to be very cautious because you want to be able to preserve, if you're able to get a conviction, you want to be able to preserve it on appeal by not making these types of errors.
And no
After
longer
his
has a voice
indictment
who will
this
pursue
week,
justice
Diddy
for her
pleaded not
accusation.
guilty to all charges
As of the taken
and was
against Diddy,
denied bond
no expansion of the
statement
investigation,
from his legal
no
team.
isolation
Reads,
orders,
quote,
no
"Shah
equipment
Diddy
access,
comes,
no
is a
suspension
music
of attorney
icon,
communication.
self-made entrepreneur,
Everything inside
loving
solitary
family
block
man,
C
and
continued as
proven
before.
philanthropist
Everything
who has
except
spent
the fear.
the last
If a
30
female
years
warden
building
can
an
vanish
empire,
after a single
adoring
nothing
his
except
children,
the fear.
and working to
If a
uplift
female
the black
warden can
community,
vanish after
he
a
is an
single note,
imperfect
ones who
person,
once
but is
worked
not
overnight
criminal
in that
to
area,
his credit.
the ones who
Mr.
filed for
Holmes
leave without
has
giving a
been
reason,
nothing
the ones
but
who saw but
cooperative
never
with
spoke.
this
No one mentions the
investigation,
note,
and he
but everyone
voluntarily
knows it
relocated
appeared.
to New
And
York
if what it
last
says
week
is true,
in
then
anticipation
punishment.
of these
Part
charges.
3.
Please
The person
reserve
no
your
longer in the
judgment
system. The
until
internal
you have
personnel
all the
database
facts.
of the
These
Atlanta
are the
Federal
acts
Detention
of an
Center
innocent
updated
man
its weekly
with
roster.
nothing to hide,
Under the
and he
category
looks
Special
forward
Personnel
to
Code
clearing his
Adjustment,
name
the
in
name
court.
of Warden
More
TD
updates
was marked
are
as
sure to
removed
come
from
in
system by
the case
administrative
of
order.
United States
There was no
versus
decision number
Shah
recorded,
Diddy.
but was
So make
deactivated.
sure to
Her
subscribe
personal
to our
contact
YouTube
information
page so
disappeared
you
from the
don't
internal
miss a
network
thing.
exactly
Reporting for
36
Law&Crime,
hours after
I'm
she
Sierra
filed her
Gillespie.